大家平安。
Peace to you all.
今天晚上我们的题目是真爱的根源。
The topic for tonight is the roots of true love.
我们有时候看到一棵树，
Sometimes we see a tree.
我们看到一棵树长得非常的茂密，
It may be a very tall and prosperous
很
tree,
多叶子。
lots of leaves.
为什么？
Why?
因为它有健康的根。
Because it has a healthy root.
如果一棵树长得很高，
If a tree is grown very tall
也长得很稳，
and it's very steady,
原因是什么？
why is that?
因为它有很好的根。
Because it has very good roots.
一棵树它是从一个种子，然后从根这样子生出来的。
A tree has grown from a seed, and the seed will develop from its roots.
那同样的，我们看属灵的方面，
So let's look at this in a spiritual perspective.
好像植物需要根。
Just like how all plants need roots.
如果爱要真实，要让人家有得到益处，
If love is to be true and to be beneficial to others, then
同样它也需要有根。
it also needs roots.
今天很多世界上所讲的爱，没有真正的根。
A lot of love that is supposedly talked about in this world are without roots.
很多人说我爱你，只是一种情感上的爱，
Some people say, I love you, and it's purely emotional.
或是对自己有好处。
Or perhaps this relationship is beneficial to them.
其实他的爱，世界上的爱并没有根。
In reality, secular love is without roots.
从神来的爱，它是有根的。
Now, the love that comes from God, it has roots.
就像植物的根，如果长得很好，它会深深的来抓住地面，然后渗透在泥土里面。
Just like a plant with very good roots, its roots will go deep down into the soil, grasp onto it to steady the plant and to find
真
nourishment.
爱的根也会进到我们的心灵，进到灵魂里面。
The roots of true love will enter our hearts and very souls.
当有真爱的时候，我们就会把心中的仇恨、心中的压迫、心中的苦毒都拿走了。
When there's true love rooting in our heart, we will remove all the hatred, the oppression, and all the negative components.
当我们在查考提摩太前书的时候，
When we study the book of 1 Timothy,
有一节是讲到爱的根源是什么。
there's this one verse that mentions what is the root of love.
我们看提摩太前书1章的第5节。
Let's take a look at 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5.
提摩太前书1章5节，
1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5.
请读。
The goal of this command is love, which comes from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith.
这里说爱的根有3点。
Here it tells us that the root of love has 3 points.
这个爱是从清洁的心、
This love comes from a pure heart,
无愧的良心
a good conscience,
还有无伪的信心生出来的。
and it is born from a sincere faith.
如果根没有错，根很好，那很健康，长出来的植物就很健康。
If the root is healthy, then the love that grows from it will also be healthy.
如果你的根是烂的，那长出来的东西也是烂的。
But if you're experiencing what we call root rot, then what will be growing from it will also be unhealthy.
会死掉的。
It will eventually die.
好，那我们今天就围绕着这一节来查考真爱的根源。
Today, surrounding this verse, we will study the topic, the roots of true love.
首先，这里保罗说，命令的总归就是爱。
Here, Paul first of all mentions that the goal of this command is love.
保罗有给提摩太很多的命令，
Paul has given a lot of instruction or command to
叫
Timothy
他怎么来牧养教会。
to teach him how to pastor the church.
但是这个命令并不是要责备他，而是爱他。
But this instruction is not for rebuke, but it is out of love.
主耶稣透过圣经的话语给我们很多的命令，
Jesus, through the Bible, has given us a lot of commands.
这些命令也是神的爱在里面。
Similarly, these commands are also out of love.
还有呢，这个命令告诉我们要彼此的相爱。
In addition, this love tells us to love each other.
所以圣经里可以学很多原文也好，背景也好，参考资料一大堆。
You can learn so much from the Bible, whether it's the original text or historical components or the context.
你穷一辈子也不可能明白每一节经节或者是每一卷书的专家。
Even if you studied your entire life, it would be impossible to be experts on every book and every chapter.
神学院的那些教授、那些长辈他也是每一个人只有研究1本到2卷。
And even theological scholars, most of them are specialists on 1 to 2 books.
但是如果你懂一样东西，你就懂了全本圣经了。
However, if you understand one thing, then you can understand the whole
我
Bible.
们看约翰福音13章34节，
Let's take a look at the Gospel of John, chapter 13,
34节，
verse 34.
约翰福音13章34节，
Gospel of John, chapter 13, verse 34. A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another.
主耶稣这里是给门徒一条新的命令，
Here, a new command Jesus gave to the disciples,
就是叫他们彼此的相爱。
which is to love one another.
原来圣经里面，你把它整本圣经66卷全部浓缩成为一个字，
All 66 books in the Bible, if you condensed it into one word,
就是一个字，就是爱。
it would be one single word, love.
如果你读了那么多，不会爱，那你就白读了。
After reading so much, but you cannot love, then you read it all for nothing.
听了一辈子，这个不去爱，我们也白听了。
You listen to the gospel all your life, but you do not put love into action, then you listen to it for nothing.
信了一辈子，每个礼拜来教会，
You believed your entire life, you come to church every week,
但是不会彼此相爱，你就白信了。
but if you do not know how to love one another, then what was your faith for?
所以这里说命令的总归就是一个字爱。
And this is the root, this is the condensation of this new command, which is love.
所以你不一定要去神学院读很久的神学，
And you may have been required to go to theological school to study a lot.
但是如果你知道怎么去爱神，知道怎么去爱人，基本上你重点就抓到了。
But if you know how to love God and love man, then you have grasped the main points of the Bible.
我们看哥加拉太书5章14节，
Let's go to Galatians chapter 5, verse 14.
加拉太5章14节，
Galatians chapter 5, verse
这里
14.
说全律法都包在爱人如己这一句话之内了。
Here it says that the entire law is summed up in a single command, love your neighbor as yourself.
这里也是告诉我们同样的道理。
The same thing it's telling us.
你读那么多圣经，就是一个字，就是爱呀。
Reading so much of the Bible, the single word is the
那
matter.
你说怎么样爱呀？
How do you love?
很简单啊，你怎么爱自己，你就怎么爱人就对了。
It's very simple. How you love yourself, you love
我们
others.
都很会照顾自己嘛，
Most people take care of ourselves.
好吃的也是自己吃啊，
You eat the most delicious things yourself.
舒服的位置想要自己坐啊，
The most comfortable seat you want for yourself.
漂亮的衣服想自己穿啊，
The most beautiful clothing you want to put it on yourself.
那你很会爱自己。
We are quite good at loving ourselves.
所以就说，如果用这个爱去爱别人就对了，
Jesus said, if you use this kind of love to love others, then you're doing it right.
不是我们不爱自己，
It's not that we don't love
我
ourselves,
们用爱自己的爱去爱别人。
but that we have to use the kind of love we show ourselves onto others.
所以啊，我们在信仰上面不能忽略爱心
So during our faith, we cannot neglect to love.
啊。但是爱心啊也是有根基啊。
But there is a root to love.
今天很多社会上有很多扭曲的爱
In the society today, there's a lot of
，twisted 的。
a twisted love.
他们说哦，只要我们两个相爱，不要管什么道德，不要管什么别人的眼光。
The saying is that as long as we love each other, then forget about what's right or wrong, forget about other people's opinions.
他们呢扭曲了爱的真谛，
They have twisted the true principle of love.
就好像一个树，如果根基坏掉了、烂掉了，整个树上面也是会坏掉。
Just like if you look at a tree, if its roots started to rot, then you will start to see decay up above as well.
所以我们要讲真爱的根源。
Therefore, we have to talk about the roots of true love.
这个根源啊，可以应用在我们的日常的生活当中。
The roots, we see it in everyday life,
无论你是夫妻之间的爱
whether it's love between spouses
啊，手足之间的爱，
or perhaps between parent and children,
教会弟兄姐妹的，
between siblings, between church
我
members.
们都需要有这爱的3个根源。
We have to have these 3 root components of love.
这个爱才是神所祝福的，神所允许的。
The love have to be within God's boundaries and blessed by God.
第一点，
The first point.
这个真爱一定要从清洁的心生发出来的。
First point is that this love have to come from a pure heart.
爱要从心里面出来。
Love have to come from the
我们
heart.
中文字啊，这个繁体字啊，爱这个字呢，是有个心在里面的。
The traditional character of love in Chinese, it has the word heart also in it.
简体字啊，就把这个心拿走了，就变成没有心了。
In a simplified Chinese, they have removed this heart from the character love.
中国人造字真的很有智慧，爱一定要有心。
It's very interesting the wisdom of creating this character in the Chinese ancestors that they emphasize how love have to have the heart.
如果你不是从心里面拿出来的爱，你就是做表面，这个不是真的。
If your love is not taken out of your heart, then this emotion is very surface. It's not real.
但是这里说要从什么样的心生出来的呢？
This verse also emphasizes what kind of heart must love come
我
from.
们看回来提摩太前书刚刚的第1章
Let's return to the verse we just looked at, 1 Timothy chapter 1,
第5节，
verse 5.
这里说爱是从清洁的心发出来。
It says that the love must come from a pure heart.
什么叫清洁？
What is pure?
第一就是它的动机一定是纯正的。
First, the motive must be pure.
再来呢，它的思想是清洁的。
Second, its conscience, its thought must be pure.
再来，因为它的动机也纯，思想也纯，所以它的行为出来也是很干净。
And third, because its motive and thought are pure, then its conduct, its actions are also pure.
如果爱的根没有清洁的心，
If the root of true love doesn't have a pure
它
heart,
讲的再浪漫、再好听、再轰烈，也是没有用。
then no matter how nicely it's phrased, how earth-shaking this love episode is,
主耶稣很看重人要有清洁的心。
then it does not count. And Jesus, he really emphasized on people having a pure heart.
我看马太福音5章的第8节。
Let's take a look at the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5.
马太福音5章8节。
Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 8.
清心的人有福了，因为他们必得见神啊！
Verse 8, Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God.
大家想不想见神？
Do we want to see God?
见神就是你以后死了，你如果醒过来的时候是在天国里面呢，看到神啊。
When you pass away in the future, you open your eyes and you're in the heavenly kingdom face to face with God.
得见神就是以后能够得救的意思。
Seeing God means that you will receive salvation in the future.
还有呢，活着的时候也可以见到神啊，
Also, when you're alive, you can still see
这
God.
对神很有体验。
In that you experience God deeply.
看神的旨意看得很清楚。
You see His will fervently.
像约伯，他说：“哇，我从前风闻有你，现在我亲眼看见你。”
Just like what Job said, in the past I've heard you, but today I have seen you.
对神呢有很深入的理解，很深刻的体会。
This intricate and deep understanding of God Himself.
这像摩西啊，他跟神好像面对面讲话一样。
Just like how Moses, he was able to almost face-to-face converse with God.
为什么古圣徒啊可以跟神有那么亲密的交通？
Why is it that ancient believers had such intimate interactions with
因为像
God?
摩西啊，还有这些人啊，他们都是心中很单纯的，
Moses and many others, they had such a simple heart.
他们没有不良的动机。
They had no evil
我
intention.
们知道一杯水，如果杂质很多，里面很多杂七杂八的东西呢，看起来都是蒙蒙的，不清洁。
If you imagine a glass of water, if there's a lot of debris, then it's not transparent at all. It looks foggy.
没有别的杂质，
If there's no debris,
一看就看到底，哎，这个水很清。
you can see this glass of water all the way to the bottom. You know that it's crystal clear.
那这是形容爱啊，
This describes love.
神对人的爱就是那么清洁。
The love that God has toward people is as crystal clear as water.
我们看《生命记》7章7到8节，《
Let's go to Deuteronomy.
生命记》第7章7到8节，
Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 7 to 8.
请读。
Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 7. The Lord did not set his affection on you and choose you because you are more numerous than other peoples, for you are the fewest of all peoples. Verse 8.
8节，
But it was because the Lord loved you and kept the oath he swore to your forefathers that he brought you out of a mighty hand and redeemed you from the land of slavery, from the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt.
这里神跟百姓说：“为什么我爱你？”
Here the Lord told his people, Why do I love you?
通常我们人有时候爱一个人是有原因的，
Sometimes when people love another person, they have their reasons.
不然你今天晚上问一下你的配偶为什么爱你，
Otherwise, you can try to ask your spouse tonight, Why do you love me?
当初为什么选你不选别人？
Or how come you chose me in the beginning and you did not choose somebody else?
一定是看到你的优点嘛。
They have seen something that they liked.
有的选的话不会选那个最不好的，
When they are choosing, they wouldn't choose the least good person
你一
in
定
that
有
room.
的选，你一定选最好的、最合理心意的嘛。
You want to choose someone that pleases your eyes, someone that you like.
最漂亮的啦，最聪明的啦，
Maybe the most beautiful, the most intelligent,
啊，他的职业又好，会赚钱，
someone with a good job. Maybe they have good earning.
哦，他很幽默，
They're so funny, they make you laugh.
总有一些优点吸引到你。
There are definitely traits that your spouse would have picked up on that they
那
like.
以色列百姓呢，他们觉得神怎么为什么选他们？
At that time, the Israelite people, they wondered to themselves, how come God chose us?
神说：“我专爱你们啊，拣选你们，
And God told them that I have chosen you, I have selected you.
并不是因为你们人比别人多，
It's really not because you were the most people.
原来你们人数比万民还小。
In fact, you were the fewest of all nations.
说实在，以色列百姓的表现也不是太好。
And to be honest, their conduct, their performance wasn't that good either.
那为什么神选他们？
So why did God choose them?
就是因为神爱他们。
It's because God loved them.
那神爱他们，并不是因为他们的行为比别人好，
But God did not love them because their conduct was better than anyone else's.
只是因为神答应了亚伯拉罕还有他们的祖宗要祝福他们。
But it was because he swore to their forefathers that he will bring them out of slavery and the power of
因
Pharaoh.
为神是信实的，
Because God is a faithful God.
所以神对人的爱，我们可以看到，
We can see that the kind of love God has toward men.
不是为了自己，不是自私的。
It's not selfless. It's not selfish.
他的爱，他为什么爱？就是因为他要爱，没有别的原因
This love, why does he love? He loves unconditionally just because of this.
啊，也不是因为他表现很好，我们才爱他多一点。
It's not because the people had good performance or good conduct.
那这个清洁的心很重要。
This pure heart is very important.
你今天想一想，我们自己摸一摸我们的心啊，
Today, you can touch your heart,
你对别人的爱，
the love you have toward other
我
people.
们已经在下一页，是否出自于清洁的心，
You can ask whether it has been out of a pure heart
还是有别的动机呢？
or has there been other motives.
我们都知道，如果别人爱你是因为有某个动机的，你听了也不高兴。
We know you can think that if you find out someone else's love toward you had ulterior motives, you probably would feel uncomfortable.
比如说，他跟你结婚，就是因为你家里很有钱，那你听了肯定，我不要跟这些人结婚。
For example, if you hear something like your spouse married you because you're from a wealthy family, you may second guess this wedding now.
他的爱就不清洁啊，不是真正的爱啊。
Then this love is not pure, it is not out of genuineness.
这个是比较极端的例子。
This is a pretty extreme
但
example.
但是
of
如果
course.
你爱别人是因为他帅、他漂亮、他家庭背景好，或者是他很聪明，
But if you love that person because they're handsome or beautiful, they're from a good family background, has a good job,
有时候不单只是这个男女之间，或者是夫妻之间，
and this kind of love is not only restricted to between husband and wife.
你很爱这个人，有其他目的吗？
You can love anyone with an ulterior motive.
是不是你想从他那边得到什么的帮助？
Is it because you want their help in some way?
还是你是想说，我爱他，就是因为神就是爱？
Or do you tell yourself that you will love them because God loves
我
them?
们看约翰一书第4章第7节，
Let's go to 1 John chapter 4, verse 7.
约翰一书4章的7节，
1 John chapter 4, verse 7. Verse 7. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God.
这里说，亲爱的弟兄啊，爱是从神来的。
Here it says that, dear friends, love comes from God.
曾经有一位弟兄呢，他自己一个来信主，
There was a brother once, he came to believe by
他
himself.
搬到一个地方，
He moved to this place.
他没有什么的物质的东西
He doesn't have a lot of stuff.
啊，那也很穷，
He was quite poor, actually.
那自己一个信主，也没有其他的家族成员在教会，
And he came to believe on his own. He had no family or relatives in the church.
甚至他的种族啊，跟教会里面其他的弟兄姐妹都不一样。
On the other hand, his ethnicity was quite different from the norm within the church
但是呢，去到
congregation.
教会里面，这个小教会很有爱心，
But when he went to this church was small, but it had so much love.
大家没有因为他的工作很卑微看不起他，
No one looked down upon him because of his lowly job.
也不会因为他种族不一样啊排挤他，
And no one marginalized him because he was of a different ethnicity.
反而特别照顾他。
On the other hand, they took a special care of him.
每次来教会，很多人去抢着跟他讲话，
Each time when he came, people wanted to talk to him.
虽然他的语言跟大家不是很通，
even though there were some language barriers.
还有时候呢，食物啊、打包啊，大家都给他带回家，
And when there were food to take home, people often gave him a share.
他就很感动了。
He was very
有
touched.
一次他就问：为什么你们对我那么好？
One time he asked, "How come you're so good to me?
我也没有什么东西可以回报你们。
I don't really have much to give in return."
弟兄姐妹就说：
The brothers and sisters said,
我们爱神，
"We love God.
神就是爱。
God is love.
我们爱你，就是因为我们爱神。
We love you because we love God.
我们爱你，因为神爱我们。
We love you because God loves us."
你不用想那么多，也不用想报答什么，
You don't have to think about it too much, or you don't have to think of ways to repay.
我们就是一家人。
We will continue to love you.
所以，如果我们每一个人对别人都有这种真诚、清洁的爱，
If all of us have this kind of crystal clear, pure love,
人与人之间呢，就有少很多矛盾啊，很多争执。
then there will be much less disagreement or misunderstanding between people.
这个社会太现实，
This is a very real society.
有时候我们把现实的一些动作、一些行为啊，带到兄弟姐妹之间，带到家庭成员之间，带到教会之间。
Sometimes we take these all too real components into the church, into our friendships, or into our
这
families.
样的爱就不真了。
This kind of love will not be
我
genuine.
们爱不是因为他值得爱，
We love not because they're worthy of love,
不是因为他很可爱，
not because they're lovable,
也不是因为他将来可以帮助我什么。
and not because they may be able to benefit you in the future.
我们爱是用清洁的心发出来，
We have to love from a pure heart
因为神就是爱。
because God is love itself.
第二点，
The second point,
真爱的根源是要从无亏的良心发生出来的。
the roots of true love have to grow from a good conscience.
提摩太前书1章第5节说，爱要从无亏的良心
And it says this in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5.
啊，无亏的良心啊，英文就是好的良心
A good conscience in Chinese says a conscience without guilt.
啊。良心是什么？
What is conscience?
其实没有良心的时候，你良心不安的时候呢，会很明显
It's quite clear when your conscience is not settled.
啊。在非洲有一句谚语，它的说法是说，如果有一个很干净的良心，这是一个最好的枕头啊。
There is the saying in Africa that says a perfect conscience is the best
Clean
pillow.
conscience 啊，
A clean conscience is the best pillow.
哇，为什么？
Why is that?
良心很安，良心很清洁，你没有什么责备你自己的，你晚上睡得很好。
When you have a good, guiltless conscience, you can have a wonderful sleep at night.
你常常做一些对不起良心的事，
If you always do little things that are against your conscience,
那晚上有时候常常睡不好。
it can definitely keep you up at night.
好，到底良心是什么？
So, what is
我
conscience?
们看箴言20章27节，
Let's go to Proverbs chapter 20, verse 27.
箴言20章27节，
Proverbs chapter 20, verse
这里
27.
说人的灵就是神的灯，鉴察人的心腹。
The lamp of the Lord searches the spirit of a man, it searches out his inmost being.
良心就是神放在人的心里面的一盏灯，
Conscience is the lamp that God has placed within the hearts of men.
跟你所受的教育、文化背景没有什么关系，
It doesn't have much to do with your education, your cultural background, and your past
甚至
experiences.
跟你看了多少圣经没有太多的关系。
It even doesn't have anything to do with how much Bible you have read.
有一些时候你做的这事情，如果违背神的旨意、违背真理的话，
Sometimes when you have done something that is against God's will, against the truth,
哦，那你心中就很难过，
you will feel bad in your heart
因为这个良心呢就开始亮了，
because this lamp of conscience will start to ignite.
就开始责备你了。
It will start to rebuke you.
譬如说你去外面买东西，
For example, you go and buy something outside
那个服务员给你找钱，
and the cashier gave you change.
给你找多了，
They gave you extra change by accident.
哇，你很高兴，哎呀，多了50块。
And you are so happy, I just earned $50.
只有你不讲话，你走了，他多找给你。
You don't say anything and you take this extra cash with you.
但是呢，你正想要把它收起来的时候，你心里面有一个声音，
But when you're about to tuck this money into your purse, you start hearing this voice
我
inside.
怎么可以要这个钱？
How can I take this?
如果我拿了，如果我拿这不诚实啊！
If I take this, I'm being dishonest.
还有，如果我拿了，那个服务员他今天的薪水可能要拿去赔这个多出来的钱，多找的钱了。
Also, if I took this home, then this cashier may have to repay that $50 out of their own salary.
所以正想要拿走的时候，你就说：“哎呀，你看错了，你多找了。”
So you were about to tuck this dollar bill into your pocket and you said, actually you gave me more than you should
当
have.
你想要贪心的时候，那个良心在亮哦，那你要听他的。
Your instinct was to be greedy, but this lamp of conscience poked you and told you to do the right thing.
尤其是现在很多东西都是自动售卖啊 ，self check out 哦，去超市买东西很多都是 self check out。
Especially these days as self-checkouts are more and more popular.
对，很多东西你可以作弊的，其实啊。
A lot of things you can actually cheat on.
虽然有就是摄影机这样照下来，但是你还是很多方法可以作弊。
Even though there are cameras usually, but there's a lot of ways to get around it.
比如说比较贵的水果，你把它打成那种比较便宜的水果的那个 code。
For example, a really expensive fruit, you can punch it in as some generic brand.
399，夏威夷木瓜399，你把它打成那个青木瓜199。
For example, the premium Hawaiian organic imported papaya that is $3.99 per pound, you can punch it in as the generic one for $1.99 per pound.
哇，有一些人很不诚实，
Some people are dishonest.
没有写那个没有说多少个塑胶袋0，但是他拿10个塑胶袋。
They say that they are taking 0 bags, so they won't be charged, but they take a dozen with them.
这个别人那个有摄影机也抓不到这些那么细微的东西。
These kind of little actions are hard to catch even with a camera.
但是看你有没有良心啊。
So it really depends on whether you have a good conscience.
常常很诚实的人，他的良心都很亮。
People who people who are always honest, they have a nice and bright conscience.
这是为什么有一些时候良心会不亮呢？
But why are there times when the lamp of conscience does not light up?
现在很多人都有良心，但是他们的良心呢是不亮的，或者是不完全的。
There's people have conscience, but there are some people their conscience does not kick in.
你问那些黑社会在贩毒的、在打架的，他也说我是凭良心做人的，对我的兄弟。
The people who get into fist fights or belong to gangs or deal drugs, they will say that I have nothing to be sorry for. I'm protecting my brothers.
甚至犯罪的人都会说自己有良心。
Or even people who break the law, they will say, I do have a conscience.
所以今天的人的良心已经是不完全的良心。
What I'm trying to say is that most of the conscience in people's hearts today are incomplete.
我们看罗马书3章23节。
Let's take a look at Romans chapter 3, verse 23.
罗马书3章23节，
Romans chapter 3, verse 23.
这里说世人都犯了罪，亏缺了神的荣耀。
Here it says, For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God.
为什么良心会坏掉？
Why would conscience break?
因为有犯罪。
Because there's sin.
人犯了罪之后，良心就不是那个神当初造的那个完美的良心。
As soon as man have sinned, then their conscience is no longer the complete version when God planted it in their
你
heart.
看这个太阳本来很亮的，
It's like you look at the sun, it's so bright.
但是有东西有这个月亮把它挡住了，它的就不亮了。
But if the moon is in the way, then it will no longer shine.
人本来有完好的良心，
People have originally a complete
但是因为
conscience.
犯罪，我们的良心也不亮了，不完全了。
However, because we have sinned, then the conscience we have is no longer complete.
还有有时候呢，我们会听到两种声音，
Sometimes we may even hear two voices.
我们要很小心哦。两种声音，这个一个就是魔鬼的声音，
We
一个就是天使的或者神的声音。
We have to be very careful because one of these belong to God or an angel, and another one belongs to the devil.
一个声音叫你贪钱呐、
One voice tells you to be greedy for money,
要你做坏事得罪神，
do bad things, go against
叫
God.
你不要去聚会了，不要听教会的啰啰嗦嗦。
It tells you to don't go to church, don't listen to sermon, don't listen to the pastor nag at
但是
you.
良心呢，会透过神的话语，想要提醒你。
Yet your conscience through God's word will still remind you.
好了，那我们每天都要做选择的，要不要听良心的声音？
It turns out that we have to make choices every day whether to listen to our conscience.
那如果你不听良心的声音，
If you do not listen,
这个良心就会越来越暗，越来越坏。
this conscience, the light will dim each day.
到最后呢，你就干脆把这个良心都丢掉了。
And at the end of the day, it will become useless. You might as well throw it out.
我们看提摩太前书1章19节，
Let's go to 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 19.
提摩太前书1章19节，
1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 19. Verse 19, holding on to faith and a good conscience. Some have rejected these and so have shipwrecked their faith.
20节，
Verse 20, among them Among them are Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I have handed over to Satan to be taught not to
保
blaspheme.
罗说啊，有一些人呢、也是变成没有良心的，
Paul said that some people have become people without conscience.
就是不是没有信神的外邦人哦。
It's not people, Gentiles, who do not believe in God.
保罗指出，许米乃还有亚历山大这两个都是教会里面大家应该知道的人，应该也是工人。
And Paul especially pointed out Hymenaeus and Alexander, well-known people, believers within the church.
就算不是长老执事啊，可能也是一般的重要的工人啊。
And whether they're deacons or just holy workers,
但是呢，保罗说他们已经丢弃了良心了。
Paul pointed out that they have thrown away their conscience.
好的工人有可能会变坏，
Good workers can be corrupt.
只有你把良心丢掉了，那就没有用了。
They become corrupt if they throw away their conscience.
所以我们要常常听良心的声音。
We have to always listen to the voice of our conscience.
保罗说啊，你丢弃了良心，就等于船破了一样啊。
Paul described how if you reject your conscience, it's like you're shipwrecking your faith.
船破了，大家有没有看过船破了的样子
Have you ever seen a shipwreck?
啊？船卡在浅的地方漏水了，停在那边不能动了。
Often it looks like a ship that is stuck in the shallows. It's leaking and it can no longer
最
move.
近的世界的大新闻，长荣的一条这个超级大游轮在苏俄斯运河卡住了，搁浅了。
And there was this huge news about this giant cruise ship that was stuck in a man-made canal.
现在全世界航运最繁忙的这个海上通道被卡住了。
And so now the most commonly used river canal is now stuck.
这个船很大啊，
This ship is huge,
但是如果破坏了，那也不能动了
but if it's broken, then it can no longer be used.
啊，那就变成垃圾了。
Becomes garbage,
除非有人去救它，
unless someone goes and saves it.
不然的话它破在那边，如果又漏水又受损的话，以后就没用了。
But if it stays there and it's leaking, it's starting to rust, then it will be no use in the future.
所以，如果弟兄姐妹我们不听良心的声音，没有好的良心，
Brothers and sisters, if you continue to ignore your conscience, you will no longer have a good
那所谓
conscience.
的爱啊，我爱神，我爱人啊，这个爱也不完全。
Then this love, supposed love toward men, toward God, it will no longer be complete.
所以我们一定要靠着主有这个清洁的良心
So we really have to lean on God to have a good conscience.
啊。如果良心没有用，
If conscience is useless,
这个人也没有用啊。
then you are useless.
啊，在下一章20页里面有一个漫画，有一些年轻人，或者是不单止年轻人，每一个用电脑的人，
And there's this cartoon, you can see that this young person is using a computer.
其实不单止 young person，他有胡子，应该可能也是中年人。
And or maybe a middle-aged person.
哦，每次用电脑，魔鬼跟天使都在你的电脑前面。
And every time he uses the computer, there is an angel and a devil sitting on his screen.
你要 search 什么？你要看什么？
What are you going to search? What are you going to look at today?
虽然你父母没有去查你的电脑，你的太太也不知道你在弄什么，
No one knows your search history. Your wife doesn't know what you're looking up.
但是魔鬼都会叫你啊，来呀、来呀、来呀、进来看。
And the devil said, come, 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 look at this.
但是良心会告诉你，不要听他，
But the conscience said, don't listen to him.
你不应该去这些网站。
You should not go to these certain websites.
不单只是对着电脑，你生活当中有很多的引诱，
Not only toward computers, but you really have a lot of temptation in your life.
所以我们要爱，真的爱要从清洁的心，还有无愧的良心发出来。
So true love will come from a pure heart and a good
你
conscience.
怎么才可以真正爱神？
So how do we truly love God?
行事为人不要违反良心。
In our conduct, in our thought, let's not go against our
你
conscience.
怎么真正爱你的配偶？
How do you truly love your
你
spouse?
做事情不要违背良心。
When you do things, do not go against your
你
conscience.
怎么知道你有违背良心？
How do you know whether you have gone against your conscience?
第一，如果你做事情遮遮掩掩，不想别人知道，那个肯定是已经违背良心了。
First, if when you do something, you're trying to hide it from others, it's a sign that you have already gone against your conscience.
哦，别人一过来你就把电脑盖住，你怕人家看到你看什么？
For example, someone comes to your desk, you slam your laptop shut. You don't want them to see what you were looking
那
at.
你就违背良心呢？
Then you're going against your conscience.
那肯定是不好的
Then it's not a good thing.
啊！你跟别人偷偷摸摸在打那些讯息啊，马上又delete掉，怕别人看见，怕你太太发现，怕你丈夫发现，那肯定也违背良心。
You're having this secret conversation with someone and you delete it as soon as the conversation is over because you don't want your spouse to see. then that is also an example.
你做了一些事情，不敢让你老板知道，不敢让公司知道，
You do these things and you don't dare allow your manager to find
那
out.
这个也是违背良心。
This is also something going against your conscience.
当你不想让人家知道的时候，你已经违背良心。
When you want to hide something, it's most likely that you're already going against
所以
conscience.
如何才能做到有好的良心？
So how do we achieve a good conscience?
这里有几点：第一，我们要按照真理而行。
A few points here is one, you have to follow the truth.
你的良心要以真理为标准，不要是你自己个人的标准。
You have to set your conscience to the standard of the truth and not to the standard of
一
yourself.
个人常常听道理，常常读圣经，他的良心会常常很亮。
The person who listens to sermon often, reads the Bible, their conscience will be bright.
再来呢，不要消灭圣灵的感动。
The second is do not ignore the movement of the Bible.
良心在警告你了，在责备你了，你马上要听话。
When you feel the poke and prod of the conscience warning you, do not ignore that.
不要硬行，不要硬装。
Do not be stubborn and break through the barrier that the conscience is trying to keep you in.
要悔改。
We have to repent.
再来呢，当别人亏欠我们的时候，我们要反省自己。
And additionally, when someone wrongs you, you have to reflect.
好，那我们再来讲第三点的。
Let's talk about the third point.
真爱的根源一定是从无伪的信心发出来的。
The root of true love, it has to come from a sincere faith.
这里说爱心是从信心发出来的。
Here it says that love comes from faith.
真正的爱是因为信神而产生的。
True love comes from this firm belief in God.
没有信神的人也会有爱心。
Without a belief in God, people can still have love.
帮助穷人周济做好事
Aiding the poor, fundraising, doing good deeds.
但是真正的爱是从真实的信仰发生出来。
But true love comes from a sincere faith.
我们看哥林多前书13章13节。
Let's take a look at 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 13.
哥林多前书13章13节，我们都很熟悉的经节。
1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 13, a very familiar verse.
就是说，如今长存的有信、有望、有爱。
And here, now these three remain. There's faith, hope, and love.
这三样，其中最大的是爱。
But the greatest of these is love.
我们常注重最后一句话，最大的是爱，要有爱心，对不对？
We often emphasize the last phrase, the greatest is love.
就是爱从哪里来的呢？
But where does love come
是
from?
从信心来的。
It comes from faith.
如果你不相信神，
If you do not believe in
不
God,
相信真理，
you do not believe in the truth,
你就不会去爱神，
then you will not love God
因为你不认识神。
because you do not know Him.
你认识神之后，你会用神的爱去爱人，
If you know God, then you will use His love to love man.
这里有一个盼望。
It gives you a
那
hope
么将来神会按照我们所做的来报应我们。
because in the future, God will reward you according to what you have done.
再苦我也要有盼望，
No matter how bitter my situation is, I will have
因
hope
为这个盼望会生出爱心。
because then out of this hope love will be born.
虽然我这样很艰难，但是我还要爱，
Even though my situation is full of tribulation, I will still love
因为我有盼望。
because I have this hope.
所以原来这个爱是从信心生发出来。
So realistically, this love is born of faith.
但是问题是我们今天的信心，或者说我们的信仰，是真的还是假的？
The question now is, the faith that we have, is it real or fake?
你说传道信仰还有真的还有假的吗？
You may ask, Pastor, is there such thing as true and false
保罗已
faith?
经讲得很清楚了，你这个信心一定要做无伪的信心，就是不可以是假的。
And Paul made it very clear that your faith has to be sincere.
我们看提摩太后书1章5节，
Let's take a look at 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5.
提摩太后书1章5节，
2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5. I have been reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded now lives in you also.
保罗说提摩太这个人呢，他是有无伪的，就是真的信心。
Paul, he said that Timothy has the sincere faith.
这个真的信心呢，是一代传一代的。
This sincere faith has been passed on from generation to
从
generation,
提摩太的外祖母罗以就有了，
all the way from his grandmother Lois.
就是罗以这个人很单纯，信神信得很真。
Lois had sincere faith because she was simple-minded.
这个提摩太的妈妈也有一样的这个信心。
Same with the mother of Timothy.
到了这个第三代呢，他的信心也是很真的。
Down to the third generation, Timothy also had a very sincere faith.
所以我们有时候问自己，我们这一份信仰，我们对神的态度到底是真的还是虚假的？
It's worthwhile to ask ourselves, this faith that we have toward God, is it true or is it false?
我觉得这个疫情啊，考验我们每一个人的信心到底是真还是假。
This pandemic really is a test of whether our faith is sincere or insincere.
在没有疫情的时候，我们每个礼拜来教会，大家都一样，
Without the pandemic, we came to church every week. Everyone is about the same.
都会来教会报道一次，
We come and report our presence at church.
听一堂或者听2堂啊，吃个饭。
We listen to 1 or 2 sessions. We stay for lunch.
这个就好像大家看得见的部分，
These are the components that people can see.
好像大家都做一样的事，
And everyone's doing the same
但是
activities.
你的心真的是信吗？
But does your heart really believe?
你用什么的态度对神？
What kind of attitude do you have toward God?
用这个态度对你这份信仰。
What kind of attitude do you have toward your faith?
疫情1年了，现在应该考验出来。
The pandemic has lasted a year, and I think this test has some results to show.
有一些人对神的心呢不诚恳，
Some people, their attitude, their heart toward God is
不
disingenuine.
用来聚会更好。哎呀，现在不会有人说我不聚会。
We don't have to come to church. That's actually a terrific thing. No one will nag me about not coming to church.
在家里听也可以，不听也可以，有什么所谓？
I can be at home. I can listen if I want to. If I don't, it's not a big deal.
谁都不知道我在做什么。
No one knows what I'm doing.
好，你对神的心是这样子吗？
Is your heart saying this to God?
啊，如果我们对神的心是真的，
If we have this true, sincere faith
就
to
算你
God,
人不能来到教会，
and even if you cannot physically be at the chapel,
不会改变你对神的心，
it will not change your heart toward God.
不会改变你的行为，
It will not change your conduct.
反而你会更小心说：哇，我很希望赶快可以回到教会。
On the contrary, it will be the opposite, that you are hoping and praying to return to church one
但
day.
是虽然我暂时不能来，
Now, even though I temporarily cannot come to
但
church,
是我要想办法跟神维持关系。
I have to find ways to maintain my relationship with
就
God.
好像两夫妻有时候暂时分开3个月、6个月、1年，
It's similar to if a husband and wife, they're temporarily separated for a few months or a year.
有一些工作，丈夫要出差，要去外面很久了。
Perhaps because one of the spouses have to work abroad.
但是呢，双方因为是真诚的爱，我要拒绝诱惑，我对对方要把对方放在心里面。
However, this couple, they have true love, so they will say no to temptation.
这个爱是经过考验的，是真的。
This love has been tested through trials. It is
所
true.
以疫情就是考验信仰。
So the pandemic is a way to test our
已经
faith.
过了1年了，大概也有一部分人已经被考验出来了。
It has been a year since the pandemic started, and there's been some results for some people for sure.
但是如果你的信仰是真的，真金不怕这个火焰的烤。
And if your faith is true, then there's a saying that true gold will not fear the test of fire.
所以我们要想想，问一下自己，我的信仰对神是不是真诚？
So we have to ask ourselves, our faith toward God, is it sincere? Is it true?
那提摩太前书里面，保罗讲过一句话。
In 1 Timothy, Paul said this thing.
我们看提摩太前书1章3到4节。
1 Timothy chapter 1, verses 3 to 4.
提摩太前书1章3到4节。
1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 3. As I urged you when I went to Macedonia, stay there in Ephesus, so that you may command certain men not to teach false doctrine any longer,
第4
or
节。
nor to devote themselves to myths and endless genealogies. These promote controversies rather than God's work, which is by faith.
保罗呢，接着告诉提摩太去警告那些人。
Here, Paul instructed Timothy to warn these people.
有一些人的信仰不单纯呢，
Some people's faith are not simple.
他们的信仰偏差了，
They have departed
不
from
传
truth.
真教，不传基本的教义，去传那些异教，这是跟使徒传的不一样了。
They are no longer evangelizing the truth, but they are teaching false doctrine.
然后呢，第4节讲那些虚渺的、荒谬的、无朋的话语。
And including devoting themselves to myths and endless genealogies.
无从的家谱，讲那些干什么？
Why are they talking about each generation of genealogy?
有一些人讲到圣经那种大道理不好好讲，神的爱啊、救恩啊、教义也不讲，喜欢钻牛角尖，讲那些奇怪的、新鲜的。
And some people, they don't like to talk about God's a command or love or the doctrines, but they want to talk about special, unique, innovative Christian
好像
topics.
要找一些人家没讲过的，要解释一些别人没解释过的。
They want to explain things that no one has ever explained before, topics that no one has heard of before.
这样子的信仰单纯吗？
Is this kind of faith simple?
你的信仰单纯，一定要道理要单纯。
Because if your faith is simple and sincere, then so has to be your
还有
doctrines.
你侍奉的动机单纯吗？
Also, the motivation of your worship, is it simple and straightforward?
我们看6节到7节。
Let's take a look at verses 6 to 7. 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 6. Some have wandered away from these and turned to meaningless talk. Verse 7.
第7节，
They want to be teachers of the law, but they do not know what they are talking about or what they so confidently affirm.
这里说啊，有一些人呢，不讲命令的总规，不讲这个正确的道理。
Here it says that some people are not talking about what is true and what is right.
讲那些有的没的虚活的话。
They're talking meaningless talk, and they don't know what they're saying.
那为什么他们要这样讲？
Why are they doing this?
他们想要当教法师啊，就是喜欢当老师啊。
It's because they want to become teachers of this law,
但是自己却不明白自己在讲什么。
but they actually don't even know what they're talking about.
哇，有一些人很喜欢讲一些很深的道理，
Some people want to talk about deep topics.
讲一些奥秘，
These mysteries or
很难懂的。
controversies, really difficult to
有一
understand.
次有一个人领会，哇，讲得很深很深。
There was this one time someone was leading a sermon, they went very deep.
有几个信徒聚完会之后，请教这位领会人员。
And so a few members after the sermon asked the sermon leader,
哎呀，对不起，想请教一下，你刚刚讲那个很深啊，可不可以跟我们解释一下？我们不太懂啊。
excuse me, you talked about such a deep topic. Can you explain it further to us? We really had trouble understanding.
那个领会的就笑笑跟他说：“你们怎么可能会懂？
And the sermon leader said, how can you possibly understand what
因为我自己都不懂，
I don't even understand?
我自己都不懂，你们怎么会懂？”
If I don't understand, then how can you possibly
大家就
understand?
更奇妙了，觉得说你不懂你还讲，
And so the people thought, well, if you don't understand, then what were you
你
talking
讲那个
about?
大家都懂的没水平嘛，大家都听不懂的，哇，在抓头发，哦，这个厉害，这个厉害。
And perhaps if you talk about something that everyone understands, then no one will admire you. But if you say something and no one understands, then people will scratch their head and think that you're amazing.
其实啊，无论我们做事情、讲道也好，侍奉也好，你要问自己一个问题：
So at the end of the day, whether you're worshiping, doing holy work, or serving, you have to ask yourself this one
真
question.
的是做这个事情是侍奉神，
Are you really doing this to serve God?
还是在侍奉你自己，还是在表现你自己？
Or are you serving yourself or even performing?
所以这个信仰真不真呢？
Whether your faith is true,
你自己最知道，
you will know.
魔鬼也知道
And the devil also
你
knows
在演的还是真的。
whether you are putting on an act or if it's sincere.
当然，神也最知道。
Of course, God knows as well.
也许你可以骗得到人，
Maybe you are able to deceive
但是也
others,
骗不到神。
but you cannot deceive God.
你骗人也骗不到一辈子。
And also, even if you can deceive men for a moment, you may not be able to deceive
So-
them a
所以我
lifetime.
们这个爱一定是要从信心来的。
So our love, it has to come from a sincere
我
faith.
们的爱是有信仰的根基的，不是随便自己讲自己的爱。
Your love, it doesn't come from thin air, it has roots.
但是这个信心是无伪的，是真实的。
This faith, it has to be genuine, it has to be true.
因为这个信如果没有行为，也是假的。
Same thing, faith without conduct is
我
false.
们看雅各书2章17节，
Let's go to James chapter 2.
雅各书2章17节，
James chapter 2, verse 17.
雅各书2章17节。
James chapter 2, verse 17. Verse 17 says, in the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead.
这里告诉我们信心什么才是真的，
Here it tells us how faith becomes true.
信心要有行为才是真的。
Faith has to be accompanied by action.
你听了那么多道理，信了一辈子，
You heard so many truths, so much sermon you've believed your whole life.
问一下自己，到底我做出多少？
You can ask yourself, how much of what I've heard did I put it into action?
现在有一些人因为疫情啊，哇，也网络也很方便，整天在家里听道理。
Some people, because of the pandemic, they're at home all the time. Internet is convenient, so they've been listening to a lot of sermons.
有人以听道理多寡来做一个夸口啊。
And as soon as they have heard a lot of sermon, they start to become
哇，台湾也
boastful.
听，香港也听，澳洲也听，英国也听，美国也听，哇，去听遍全世界。
They are listening to a sermon in each time zone all over the world.
有一些人连吃饭都在听啊。
Some people are even listening to sermon during mealtime.
哇，有一些家人受不了了，求求你吃饭的时候可不可以不要听？
And some of their family members say, can we please eat dinner in silence?
听道理不是不好，但是也不用24小时都听。
Listening to sermon, it's a good thing, but you don't have to listen to it 24/7.
不是在乎你听了多少啊，
Because it's not about the quantity.
你听很多啊，
You listen to a lot.
但是行为都没改变，
But if your action remain the same,
都是一样的。
then it's the same.
那么这个信仰怎么可以说是真的呢？
Then how can you say that your faith is true?
你没有理由听那么多，但是行为都不改变。
You really have no reason not to change your action if you have listened to that much
如果
sermon.
听很多行为没改变，代表生命有问题。
If you have listened to a lot of sermon, yet your actions do not change, then there's something wrong.
你的信心如果没有行为，那还是死的。
If your faith is not accompanied by action, then it is dead.
所以听的时候一定要把重点写出来，跟自己的行为对照。
When you listen to sermon, it's very important to write down the key points and to reflect your actions upon it.
听完一篇道理，至少要抓一个重点，说我要改哪一点。
Each time you listen to a sermon, you have to grasp at least one theme and make a commitment that I will do or I will
如
change
果一
this.
个礼拜能够改一点的，那就够了。
If you can make one change per week, that's sufficient.
你不用听100篇道理，
You don't have to listen to 100 sermons.
你好好听一篇，做笔记，然后为这个事情祷告，改一点自己的行为就够了。
Just invest yourself in one sermon and be committed to make one change that will be adequate.
这个我们有没有做？
Have you done this?
所以真爱的根源
So, in truth, the roots of true love,
是从清洁的心、
it comes from a pure heart,
无愧的良心，
a good conscience,
还有无伪的信心
and a sincere faith.
所生出来的。
It is born from that.
我们来唱诗
Let's sing a hymn.
330首。
330.